for just joining us. We're going to give everyone about another minute to join in. Thank you for joining us today. Nothing like the internet going down to get my heart racing. Oh, goodness. Okay. Oh. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Ladies, are you all ready? Panelists, you're good to go? Everyone's
good to go?
All right, let's get this party started. So I'm Amanda Prochaska, I'm the CEO of GWPP, or Global Women Procurement Professionals, and we're so thrilled that you join us today. We know that you're all busy. I posted something this morning that said, I feel like we're all trying to save the world. We're trying to save the world in our companies and our roles, and then also at home at the same time. So I do understand that there's a lot of demands on your time and that there are several webinars to choose from. So I'm glad that you chose us today. So before we get into the panel, I wanted to say a few words about GWPP, just in case you're not familiar with us, and then I will hand it over to Karina to to review the wonderful sponsor that we have today. So with that said, let's get started. So what is GWPP? GWPP is a online and in-person community, when we can be in person again, of women procurement professionals. And we're all about helping women and men in procurement to live their best careers. So a lot of the content that we talk about is not necessarily about how to negotiate the best contract or do something like that, but it's all about helping you develop yourself so that you can achieve greater success in whatever path you want to take. So that's what we do. We have webinars like this one today. We're doing a lot more webinars these days. But then we also, when we can get back together again, have local events that happen almost monthly. And we have this wonderful online community of about 4,200 women and men in procurement from around the globe who have conversations via LinkedIn every single day. So why the hummingbird? And I love talking about this because I think it represents all women in procurement. The hummingbird is a powerful creature, just like each and every one of us. They fly up to 30 miles per hour. They move fast, just like we do. And we can go long distances, like the hummingbird flies 300 miles twice a year. Certain ones of them do, at least, for their migration. They are powerful, beautiful, and they unexpectedly achieve more than any other bird. They're overachievers, courageous, and adventurous, which we hope all of you are too. But they're equally as diverse. There are over 300 different species of hummingbirds, and when they're all together, they're referred to as a shimmer, which we hope that all of you get your shimmer on day in and day out, and that this content shared today will help you do that. So we are a free membership group, which means that we rely on partners like the ones here on the screen to help sponsor events like this. So it would be remiss if we didn't thank all of our sponsors for their passion for women in procurement and creating great content like what we are going to share today. So our spotlight sponsor is Insight Sourcing Group, which Karina is going to be sharing a little bit more information about. But this is a series of webinars, and Coupa and Spend HQ are the other two sponsors for this webinar series. So we cannot thank them enough, again, for what they do for women in procurement and to help bring content like this to our community. Our annual sponsors also include Coupa, HPP, Holyoke Search, Let's Talk Supply Chain, and RSN. So without all of them, we would not be here. So many thanks to them. With that said, I think I would love to learn a little bit more about Insight Sourcing Group. So I'm going to hand it over to Karina to go through a little bit more about them, and then we will get started on this panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm actually going to take over for Karina. She is my partner in crime, but we thought this would be a little smoother. My name's Lindsay Bryant, and I'm a vice president with Insight Sourcing Group. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and we're glad to have all of you with us. We're really excited to partner with GWPP along some really distinguished procurement executives who are going to be talking with us today. For those of you who may not be familiar, Insight Sourcing Group is the parent company to Spend HQ. But we are also the only North American strategic sourcing consulting firm focused on strategic sourcing and procurement transformation. Our firm's developed a reputation for collegiality, a high caliber of our teammates, our tremendous focus on client results, innovative approaches to in our space, and our ability to deliver strong outcomes. At ISG, we really strive to build strong relationships, whether that's with our clients, our suppliers, but in particular with our teammates. We do this through various initiatives, including our diversity committee, our women's network, our service initiatives where we give back to the community, as well as a leadership development program that really touches everybody in the organization, not just senior leaders. I'm sure some of our panelists may touch on some of the similar aspects in their companies. They bring a diverse background encompassing some 30+ years of experience in procurement and sourcing across a wide variety of organizations. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves as we address our first question, so let's go ahead and dive in. First question is going to be, what got you into procurement in the first place? So, Irini, why don't you go first, starting with a brief introduction of yourself, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Irini Doss. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I have been in procurement for about 15 years and love it. I have worked in procurement in everything from a startup up to a Fortune 50 company. Some of the companies that I've worked at include Motorola, Google when it acquired a division of Motorola, United Technologies Corporation, Walgreens, and I'm now at Tenneco, an automotive parts company. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for almost 3 years in the past and worked at a startup there. I currently reside in Chicago, my hometown. In my personal time, I'm involved with medical mission trips to different parts of the world. I love to travel, foster parents, and am active with a women's cooking club in my immediate neighborhood. As to how I first got involved with procurement in the first place, I started my career as an electrical engineer, specifically in software programming. I found it to be very mundane and uninteresting for me anyways. So I started to explore other opportunities and kind of fell into procurement by accident when I started to work closely with one of our manufacturing locations. I asked the leader in procurement if I could shadow him and really enjoyed doing that. When a job became available in his group, I applied for it and got the job. What I love the most about procurement is that I'm still able to use my analytical skills that were developed during my engineering education. And I'm also able to combine that with my business and negotiation skills together to get the best quality product to our internal stakeholders at the best possible total costs and at the least amount of time possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Nyla, why don't you go next?
Today, this is really exciting to be part of the panel, even that's here, and to be part of the women's group here as well. So my name is Natalie Yazdani. I've been with PSAV for at least 5 years. I started out in this 3PL logistics company and then transitioned over to consulting, operations consulting, traveled quite a bit, road warrior. I feel your pain, Lindsay, as you're doing that right now. And then from there, I moved into sourcing consulting, and that's kind of what got me into procurement. And I found that I really like negotiating and being on the other side and challenging suppliers and stakeholders. From there, though, I got exposed more into procurement, which is like the end-to-end management beyond just the sourcing. And where I found I tend to thrive and I'm very passionate about is the longer-term relationships beyond just the sourcing, which is why I'm still here in procurement and at PSAV. I've been part of the women's group at PSAV as well, and that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about being here. And it's one of the BRG groups that actually took form and shape at PSAV over the last couple of years, and it's kind of set the standard for other groups that are now coming up and coming at PSAV. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. Rachel, how about we hear from you next? A brief introduction and what got you into procurement.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, I'm Rachel Henney. I work at the Standard Insurance as the head of our procurement strategic sourcing and supplier management organization. Similar to Irini, my journey to procurement was a bit by accident. I was working at Accenture for a long time and really started to enjoy some of the supplier relationships we had with our servicing model, and wanted to work more on those partnerships and the partnership model that suppliers can offer. It really drove home for me the difference that you can achieve with a partnership relationship than just with buying goods and services and trying to get the best price. So by accident, I sort of started to work in that, transitioned to Microsoft, and then I'm now at Standard for the past several years. One of the biggest passions I have is promoting women in their careers, and I've really valued GWPP's participation in growing that opportunity for people in the procurement profession. And part of my two passions aligned when I got into procurement. So I've really enjoyed growing into this role a little bit ergonomically as we've changed the environment. So I'm happy to be here today and look forward to talking to all of you.
Great, thank you. And Sonia, why don't we hear from you?
Hi everyone, glad to be here. My background in procurement includes 17 years in the financial industries. I have been involved in every aspect and category of procurement, so have a wide breadth of experience. I am also really passionate and involved in D&I. Something that I really care about is diversity and inclusion in wherever I work. So I've been part of the Barclays D&I programs across, which is where I now work, Barclays, where I've been here for 10 years. I currently lead procure to pay transformation in procurement for Barclays. And then my background actually is not procurement, like some of the others mentioned here today. My background is actually catering and hotel management. So I did my degrees in all of that. I was working in the hotel industry and then decided to move out into procurement. And that was just by chance, where I was doing my internship at Ixis Capital, a French bank. And there was a job open for procurement, and post my internship, I decided to go for it. And I never looked back, and I'm happy I didn't. So it's been a great experience and a great joy. I spend my free time, a little personal note, cooking, which obviously is a passion of mine from my education. And then also spend a lot of time in the backyard doing some vegetable gardening, thanks to my kids and my husband, which was a Mother's Day gift. So really excited about using the time we have at home and building that relationship at home and building on that healthy living lifestyle.
That's great, Sonia, thanks. And that's an interesting path to getting here. I laugh because I always tell our candidates who are interviewing with us out of undergrad that nobody grows up saying they want to be in procurement, but it definitely makes for a very interesting and fun career. All right, well, great. Well, let's go ahead and get into more of the theme of our conversation today, which is obviously focused on the strength of relationships. And I'm sure all of you have had the opportunity to leverage your relationships. Some of those may have been stressed, especially during the COVID time. And we'd like to talk about the employees and team, but we want to start with the suppliers in today's environment. So with that in mind, you know, the relationship between suppliers and buyers is critical in this environment. And you know, what are some of the challenges that you've maybe been faced with individual organizations, or what steps have you taken to maintain relationships with your suppliers, especially those that are critical to your business? So Sonia, let's start with you. Just work our way backward. Can you speak about how you and your team have managed your supplier relationships at Barclays?
Yeah, so I think these are really trying times for everybody across, and I think it's especially trying for suppliers. It doesn't get easier when we're in a situation where the businesses are looking to control their spending, looking to choke that demand because we don't know how the economy is progressing in terms of daily updates. There's a lot to have to say about how that impacts suppliers. And that's where I think it becomes critical, because these are the suppliers that have a business to run, right? And I think that's where we have taken a very proactive look at working with our SMEs to accelerate some of those payment terms. We need to make sure that as we have these services being provided and consumed, even if people are not in office, there's services and businesses still running. We need to make sure that our suppliers are adequately and efficiently compensated for those services. So what we've done is accelerated the payment terms so we can get that money out faster, quicker, and efficiently to those suppliers so they don't feel the burden of that. We've also run additional sessions that we run with our supplier managers to make sure that we keep up to date on the health of our suppliers. We need to make sure how they are coping in this crisis so that relationship becomes even more important. We need to be able to get the pulse on our suppliers, need to be able to understand if they're struggling, if there is any issues they're facing from resourcing perspective. And if we don't know, we can't help. So I think it's really, really important that those conversations and dialogues become more frequent. They become more important so that we can then ensure that we can maintain the well-being of our suppliers and support them.
That's great. That's great. And as Amanda was just commenting, I mean, to hear that compassion for the suppliers and recognizing that we're all in this together and it's a difficult situation for everybody, I think goes a long way. Irini, let's move to you. You know, working in the automotive industry has probably been, you know, even more trying in this environment. Can you speak to how you've managed some of your relationships with suppliers during this time?
Sure. So right now, just until a few weeks ago, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler weren't even operating their manufacturing plants here in the US much, and thus not much was being manufactured. As a result, many employees were furloughed or asked to take a pay cut. When companies are not generating nearly as much money as they normally do, times get tough for both the company and its suppliers. So just like our customers in some cases are no longer paying us in as timely of a fashion, we then work with our suppliers to identify opportunities where we can extend our cash as well. So when we've been going out to our suppliers to ask for better payment terms or better cost, we make sure that we do it in a very transparent fashion because these relationships are very important to us and we want to continue these strong relationships. And we keep our suppliers apprised of what's going on with our business, and they also inform us of how their business is faring. There have been some times when it has been difficult to even reach out to various key contacts at suppliers, only to find out that that person was furloughed or their job was terminated on their end. So one of the things myself and the team continue to do is to reach out to those suppliers a lot more than we had in the past prior to this pandemic, to find out who the correct points of contacts are at the business, and to again ask them how is their business faring and how can we work together towards improving conditions. I think communication is key through this difficult time, and maintaining regular contact with my suppliers has helped mitigate some of these challenges.
No, I think that's great. And again, you know, trying to work with them goes a long way. You know, we're starting to get a couple questions that are coming in. And so we'll take those as we get them to some degree. But, you know, Nyla, I want to piggyback and jump to you a little bit on Irini's comments around, you know, cash aspect, and cash is king. How are you managing relationships with your suppliers while also trying to manage cash flow?
I think, you know, one of the things that we've been able to do, and I have oversight of not just procurement, but also accounts payable, so the entire procure to pay flow, right? And I think being able to connect the dots between the two teams, because the AP team is dealing with the AR teams at the supplier side, and then, you know, the procurement team is has oversight of the strategic relationships or what have you. And I noticed that a question did come in about the smaller suppliers. So, you know, being able to segment out suppliers in terms of who are your preferred suppliers, and then who are your, you know, your valued suppliers with whom you may not have a contract, but you do have a tight relationship. And then you have obviously our wonderful middle spend of suppliers. In this environment, you want to make sure that nobody feels ignored, because coming out of this, which we will, right, you're going to need some of those suppliers, all of those suppliers, and maintaining those relationships. So, that said, though, if we currently have about 5,000 suppliers, and I don't think it's practical to talk to all 5,000, right? So you have to start to prioritize, and I think that's where the preferred suppliers are the ones where you typically do have the largest amount of spend. You want to assess, what nature of business they're in, how much risk and exposure do they have, and we have some of those relationships too, where, Irina, to your point, or you want to talk about being as transparent, exercising empathy, showing them your cards and saying this is where we're at. And in some cases, you're wanting to hold on to cash, but you also need to place new orders, and they're trying to figure out their new risk going forward while there is the existing liability, right? So it's kind of coming up with a plan and working together for a longer term cause, when understanding as well what are their must-haves, because the folks that we deal with on the procurement side are the sales folks, right? And so they're going to need to connect with our finance folks. So how do you quickly mobilize discussions between, my finance organization on the accounting and treasury side, as well as the finance on the other side with the suppliers. So it's really collaborating with those. I've also found, like, even in segmenting out suppliers, with some of the suppliers that we have that are smaller, are they in the outside labor or temp labor space? Because you're talking about human resources. There are folks that need to get paid, to pay their own bills, because these are individual contractors. Even prioritizing those payments may be something that we want to do, and we have done, and in working with other suppliers. But overall, our goal is to not create a wedge in this relationships or the relationships that we have with all of our suppliers, but segmentation, and then determining how to approach, the key segments within the supply base is what is a strategy that we've employed as well.
Yeah, that's great, Nyla. And I see a lot of our other panelists nodding their heads. Do any of the panelists have any other comments around how to handle some of these smaller suppliers, recognizing there's only so much time in the day?
This is Rachel. So we had two scenarios at Standard. One was large international outsourced services that really struggled and had to quickly shift. And then one was very small niche providers, being in Portland, Oregon, that were supporting us directly and locally and didn't have the ability to come into the offices anymore. Very small boutique firms focused on our particular business line, that we only had a few people working for us. And one of the things that we really did differently was, instead of looking at these as two separate scenarios, we segregated those operational suppliers and the work that we could do with them and those strategic partnerships from these smaller suppliers. And to Erica's question a little bit, what we did differently and how we considered what we could do and stay in touch and nurture them in a unique way was first just have that conversation openly and transparently, saying, what do you need to maintain your success? What do you need that's different right now, and how can we support that? And by opening up the door to that conversation, we got a lot of information back, but primarily what we heard back was, I just need flexibility in my model. I need to be able potentially to work differently than you've seen me work before. And by opening it up, I think that we created that lack of fear that they were going to create, misses in their delivery, and that we weren't going to support them. By having the conversation directly up front was one of the biggest impacts. As a result, they were more interested in providing that partnership level of support, even as a smaller supplier. And Erica, if your question's different, let us know. The only other thing I'd add really quickly was relationships are important, and being able to leverage the contracting support model that you put in place is important, but having flexibility to a business continuity plan or approach when things change can't happen without that strong relationship. Having those conversations and focusing on having a real conversation of value that they bring and what you need from them and what they need from you back was most helpful in us being successful during this recent pandemic.
Yeah, the other thing I would add too as well is, in terms of solidifying the relationship, some of the conversations that we've even had with the smaller suppliers with whom we have large amount of spend is you tend to become a little bit of a coach, because we may be the bigger supplier, and right, or a customer for them. And you know, what are some strategies even from how to manage cash? How do they work with or partner up with, you know, financial institutions which they previously would not have had, because you know, everything is what that they've done internally is to manage cash based on revenue that they're generating, right? Working with a bank, you know, in this situation, and then also then coming to the table to say, okay, if you're going to start working with a bank, how much do you need from us is another level of a conversation that we previously may not have had. But in this instance, I mean, in this scenario right now, those are key conversations that we're having that I think are solidifying or making our relationship even stronger down the road.
I wanted to say one thing that we've been able to do is when we find with some of the small suppliers, they're not able in many cases to get for an area that's outside of their core competency as good pricing as we as a large company of 80,000 employees are able to get. So for example, when I was working with one of our marketing fulfillment warehouse contracts and we were renegotiating, they weren't able to get us to the price point we wanted, and we explored their shipping rates, and we found that by allowing them, and this is part of being creative right now, by telling them, why don't you use our UPS account, Tenneco's UPS account, they were able to get the cost down to where we wanted it to be because their shipping rates came down 30–40% by using our account and leveraging the large amount of users we have versus the small company.
That's great. And I think that's all really helpful. I mean, we have to have our suppliers involved and engaged in making sure that our business runs smoothly, and we want to return the same favor to them. So thank you for everybody's comments on that. Let's switch gears a little bit. You know, we've talked about supplier relationships. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, internal and how you've maybe managed some of those relationships, whether that's with your team, with your leadership. Irini, let's go ahead and start with you. Can you share with us how you've leveraged your relationships internally with your stakeholders, and how you've maybe been able to challenge the status quo when necessary to get things done?
Sorry about that. Need to get off mute. Sure, absolutely. So right now, like I said, it's been a very challenging time. So what we're finding more than ever is that during these trying times, we are finding that cash is indeed king. I've been fortunate enough within my tenure at this company to have developed some mutually strong rapport and trust with many of my internal stakeholders, which has allowed me or enabled me to be able to challenge how things are done today, and often come back to them and say, you know, but why? I don't understand, why are we doing things like this, without anyone being offended, which is great. So as a personal example, again, right now we're really trying to find ways to conserve cash and to dish out less cash out there and to get more cost reductions and savings. So a personal example, when I was negotiating some of the automobile fleet management contracts with our suppliers, I started to think outside the box and question, you know, why do we even have a fleet of cars for our sales team in the first place? Managing an auto fleet is not one of our company's core competencies. So I went back to my leadership team and I said, would you guys please allow me to, instead of focusing just on negotiating this contract, to go ahead and run some data analytics to determine what the total cost of ownership, how much it's costing us to manage this fleet per month per car. So it took a couple months to get this data. And once I was able to secure this clean data, I went to the leadership team and presented an alternative to even this entire negotiations, and presented why I thought that eliminating our fleet altogether and replacing it with more of a mobile stipend program for our sales team would be more flexible and cost effective for the company and its employees. So 6 months later, we eliminated our sales fleet and moved towards a new program in which employees would drive their own personal cars for business and would get reimbursed monthly for their expenses. This allowed employees, if they managed their expenses frugally, to actually drive and get cars that they normally wouldn't have been able to afford, and offering them that flexibility. Several leadership members in the beginning, before I came up with this business case, were really anxious to consider such a bold change for the company. because they've had that fleet for over 20, 30 years. But when I presented that compelling story and had the data to back up that story, everyone agreed that eliminating the fleet was in the best interest of the company and for the employees. So that's kind of my personal story of how we can be more bold today in creative, in looking for opportunities, but you have to have that trust with your internal stakeholders to be able to even approach that.
I think that's great. And you also mentioned that you wanted to run the data behind it, because data can go a long way in improving your case. So I think that's always something we want to couple with, maybe that gut instinct of, let me go to check this out. Rachel, maybe we'll move to you next. Can you share maybe 3 areas of focus that you've had in terms of building greater relationships internally?
So 3 things, what we noticed that happened quickly this last several months was fear was rising, anxiety and unknowns were bigger and bolder in the concerns of our leadership team. And so what we really did was change our approach to combine some of our historical data analytics with a committee-driven model internally. So including those individuals in the various stakeholder groups as part of the decision-making process up front, part of the business process design up front, really changed our internal relationship value stream model for procurement. We took those committees made up of different members of legal and HR and finance and procurement and the business units themselves and talked about the challenges that they were facing. And instead of implementing a model that was focused only on standardized procurement best practice, we really morphed our model into something that addressed those committees' concerns up front. That's one thing that we did. The second thing we did was change our communication model. Many of the communications that happened between our suppliers and our internal stakeholders were focused on things around upcoming spend, renewal of contract, more opportunities for growth, and what they were going to get as a result of what they were buying. What were the SLAs? How were they going to achieve those results? What we did was we changed our communication model to focus on a shorter term current problem and how we could address that, and brought everybody from that committee into that model and communicated jointly and as partners rather than back and forth with the contract as our guide. The contract went into a drawer a little bit, and we really focused on what do we need to do to achieve the results jointly that we both are facing challenges with. The third thing that we did was we modified our solution to have a partnered transformation and innovation goal. So each of us had a stake in that goal that we were trying to accomplish. In changing this model rapidly, we found quick things were needed to be done real time. And so by combining our goals and making it a joint process, we were much more successful in achieving the results. It didn't feel like an internal stakeholder was having to give up something or a supplier was having to give too much. Internally, one of the biggest results of that partnership really was longer term, deeper internal support for procurement, as well as a business partner, supplier partner, and procurement triangle that really helped drive what we saw was a change in those expectations of partners and relationships in a big way. The last thing that we did really was around standardized visibility to our results and our outcomes. Creating that visibility to data made it actionable. Keeping data in a box and storing all of that transactional data within procurement drove only one path forward, but standardizing the visibility to all of our reporting data helped everybody on that committee have actionable data, not just data for the sake of data.
Those are great. Those are really helpful. Sonia, let's move to you and sort of the same question. How are you engaging with your colleagues and really the broader organization at Barclays this time to make sure that people continue to realize that the relationships are important, even if we're all sitting on Zoom calls and don't actually get to see each other anymore?
Yeah,
I guess in person, I should say.
Yes, right timing. So I think one of the things that I would like to remind people, and something that is really important to know, that more and more that we see, this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. We're not going to get out of this. We haven't been out of this any quicker, and I don't think it's going to happen in a matter of days. We're talking about weeks and months at this point, right? That makes it even more essential that, you know, those colleagues, those stakeholders, the clients, And really, you know, to the original point, some of these suppliers for us at Barclays are our clients, right? So that relationship goes a long way all across, you know, in terms of our relationships. But we're talking about colleagues and your clients and stakeholders. This is the right time to make sure we have that enduring conversations. What we've done is we've put in some simple things like twice a week catch-ups with your teams, making sure that we have the right pulse on what is going on with their lives. And this is not just about work. This is about their personal lives, their families, how they're dealing with it, what's the stress levels. We've ran a bit of surveys internally in procurement and widely in Barclays for the colleagues to understand what's their capacity, right? Just because you're working from home, you may not be at full capacity to do what you were doing in office, right? You have, as we know, different competing priorities in these times. So how much time can you actually spend? If you are recovering or in isolation, those are questions we need to know so we can then be able to support our colleagues better. You know, same with our clients and stakeholders. I think the more we know, the better we can help. And I've said this before for our suppliers, and it goes same for our stakeholders. If we know what the demand is, we can support it better. And one of the things that we've done consistently is make sure that we know what the demand is. What is our upcoming renewals? What is in our pipeline? And what are our stakeholders planning to do? What are projects that they have put on hold? And having those conversations with teams like technology are really important, because you can then do those prioritization exercises to say what projects need to be started, stopped, or put on hold. What is our priorities on these projects? So that will then ease up the burden on your colleagues and your stakeholders in how they're contributing. Something very important, we've also put in a bit of a choke on the demand from our stakeholders to say, do we really need to do some of these procurement activities at this point? Because that's an additional burden that you may end up putting on your sourcing managers and others. So have that, it's a good thought to have a think about how the downstream impact will be on your colleagues and your teams. That is important to know. One of a really, really good point that I wanted to elaborate is, you may have seen it online, but Barclays has been running a program where if there were any colleagues that were furloughed right before COVID started, we've then reached out to those colleagues who would probably be out of a job right now because they were furloughed right before COVID. We've reached out to them, and we are now providing them 80% and something to that effect, salary back to them in terms of financial support. And those are ex-colleagues, right? So they're not part of Barclays, but we recognize we don't have to do that. But that's the right thing to do. It's about the human touch. We need to make sure that people are taken care of. If they've been ex-colleagues of Barclays, it doesn't matter. And that's some of the things that we're trying to do in keeping in touch with our colleagues, ex-colleagues, and stakeholders. Lindsay.
I think that's great, Sonia. I mean, that's things that we're doing at Insight Sourcing Group as well. We echo a lot of those similar activities just in terms of touch bases and keeping connected to people. We talk a lot about empathy with our leaders to recognize, like we were talking, that everybody's kind of handling this different and has a different situation at home. And it may not be the normal day-to-day like you were used to in the office. So we need to be empathetic to those situations. And that goes a long way towards building relationships. You know, there's the quote of, you know, how leaders react in a crisis is really how you can think of them. And hopefully everybody feels like their leaders are doing the right things, because we're definitely in that crisis mode. I don't think any of us have seen anything quite like this before. And speaking of crises, Nyla, you know, this is not the only crisis. This is a large one, of course, but, you know, businesses face crises at different points in their trajectory. And sometimes somebody in procurement is brought in to really help bring organizational change, bring transformation from a procurement standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about how you've overcome some of those challenges and building relationships when you've been put in that situation?
Sure. And I'm sure a lot of the folks, my fellow panelists and everybody else listening in, who's the buzzword nowadays has been procurement transformation, right? And that transformation word in and of itself, it brings in the idea of a lot of change. being a consultant previously and then now joining PSAB 5 years ago, change and transformation has been something that I've either been part of or now in the capacity of leading as well. When I first came in, I was tasked with changing the roadmap for procurement, the branding, how we're viewed, and a lot of that success has to do with the team as well. So what I had to do was look at what the team was doing, how they were performing, how do you put KPIs to that? So in terms of how much of our spend was being managed through purchase orders, which shows the strength of the control that we have through our spend. So getting all those metrics and then showing them, my leadership and the team as well, that this is the art of the possibility. And that can be pretty scary for the team. So, I very quickly within the first 3 months had to repurpose the entire team, restructure them. They may not have had the skill set there. So it was very, I'm sure, unnerving for them. For me as well, just because this was kind of like rebuilding with what I already had with the team that was there. So there was a lot of unrest. There was a lot of skepticism as well. But, I found that I had to continue to set goals, coach the team in varying capacities, whether it was analytics or spend analysis, even showing them how to do spend analysis and some of the logic behind that. There was a lot of training and everything that I had to personally do. So it was like rolling up my sleeves and everything. So, fast forward from when I joined a year later, I thought I was doing great. And, the team's totally doing what they need to do. And if they had to push back, I have veto authority is kind of what I thought. And then all of a sudden I was told, hey, maybe we should do like a 360 review on you. and the procurement team was holding, again, performing really well, and we were rebranding and everything, and everything was going well. And then when I got the results back of the 360, that was very revealing for me. And I thought I was doing a great job with them in terms of my relationship. But what I found was, while everybody knew that, it gave me feedback that procurement was doing really well as a department, the relationship with my team was not maybe the strongest, right? So I found that in this transformational environment, while we were heading in that direction, personal relationships with the team and loyalty and building that was maybe not, was an area of opportunity. So, I had to take a step back and then really start to talk to the team, and then again, be more empathetic and really start to relate with them at a personal level, which does not come naturally to me, but it's a learned skill. But once I did that, and it's rinse and repeat, right? You want to open yourself up and show how vulnerable you are to them and how much you do depend on them. Again, not from a metric standpoint, but more from a personal, empathy standpoint. Case in point, one of my team members every Monday would ask me how my weekend was, which was for me the weirdest question. But now, now fast forward 2 or 3 years later, I'm actually very interested in how everybody is doing and how their weekends were, because that is something very important in terms of a work-life balance. I think what that's been able to do and has allowed us in this environment today is we one day were at work and the next day we all went remote, right? And so how do you even continue to make sure there's an element of normalcy in your relationship still while you're trying to pivot from your goals that were previously established to now new goals, like cash is king, right? They're key contributors in helping with that too. I can't do everything on my own. So creating that normalcy and still maintaining virtually through Zoom or through Teams now, how do you continue to create that structure and how do you continue to build that loyalty is becoming very key even in this pandemic. And I don't think we would have been able to pivot so quickly if we hadn't applied those lessons learned, or if I hadn't applied those lessons learned to really build the strong relationships that I do now have with the team.
I think that's great, Nyla. And, we talk about relationships, but it's obviously a two-way street. It's not just relationship with a supplier, with a client, but it's also, it comes back, right? And so if you have the courage to sort of look at yourself and say, maybe it's not them, maybe it's me, and maybe there's some things I can do to improve, that, I think that goes a long way. And I think it shows that human side of yourself when you're willing to put yourself out there, collect that feedback, and then work to improve it, and your team sees that, and your colleagues see that. I do think it really helps build stronger relationships as a result. Well, thank you for that. We have a couple questions that have come in, so I want to touch on those. The first one, I think they're both from Erica. The first one, Erica, she mentioned, how do you negotiate costs when cash is tight on both sides right now? And we've talked a lot about cash is king, and everybody is stretched thin, but how have you gone about negotiating that? And it might piggyback into her next question of, are you holding suppliers to their penalties, or is that part of your negotiation if they're not reaching their SLAs in time? So, Rachel, I don't know, maybe you want to go first. I think you had a couple thoughts on this as you were messaging me.
Yeah, so we had a tough choice to make with SLAs. We had one area, our contact center, that did not meet any of the SLAs because nobody was able to be there. Suddenly our Philippines office was shut down, our India office was shut down, and nobody could get into those offices. We had many people calling and nobody able to answer their calls for about 8 days. So we had to make a decision on how we were going to address that, seeing as our supplier had really stood up and made a big effort to switch gears and rapidly create an opportunity for them to come in and support, and did a lot of what we considered above and beyond the contract to help address the gaps in their ability to meet the business continuity plan. So what we did was we looked at it holistically and decided as a company that we were going to pay them for the particular month that they had already worked as though everything was completed on time, and assess the overall impact to our business and modify the next invoice monthly cycle in part where we split that difference. Most of the reason for that decision to share the burden of that was that we realized that yes, it was out of their control. They couldn't do a lot of things that they would normally do, but also it did cost us money to ramp up our contingent staff in an on-site facility and or at home to mitigate that. So we recognized what they were doing, we recognized what we had to do, and we made a decision as a company to split that. It doesn't mean that all of the decisions would be made the same. The second area, besides contact center, was some of our online services. They weren't able to support a failure of their server on site because they couldn't get on site to that data. In that capacity, we had a little bit different model. We did hold them accountable to their SLAs because of the fact that as a business critical application, we have a very clear expectation of business continuity as it relates to that data, and our customers were directly impacted. Work at an insurance company and people couldn't make their claims. And it was a pretty important time to be able to make health claims for COVID. And we had to make sure that we were mitigating that risk immediately, and it cost us a lot of money to do so. So in that case, we did hold them to those penalties. I don't think that there's a black and white answer. I think that you have to look at the impact to your company and the long-term investment you've made in your suppliers. It was an emotional conversation for a lot of people. It felt sad to them that they couldn't fix the problem immediately. They wanted to come in and help, and they were a little bit tied at the hands and couldn't get it done. So I think that my advice to people in this scenario is that you look at the data and you look at the impact and you look at the long-term relationship that you have. Small suppliers are going to be impacted bigger and more dramatically than large suppliers. And you have to make a decision on, is this a long-term investment that you're making with your suppliers, or is this an opportunity for you to really hold them to those terms and conditions, and what would be the ramifications of it? So each of them were handled a little bit differently, and I think it depended on our business's ability to support that impact and what we saw as reasonable. That's my sense, is that you need to have a conversation and communicate with them and look at your overall impact. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I think the idea that it's not black and white is very smart. Does anybody else have any other comments on these couple of questions from Erica?
Yeah, I could jump in on the negotiations. Lindsay, having oversight again of AP and procurement, right? You get the benefit of seeing both sides of it. I'll give you an example that recently came our way. We had an open AR balance with a particular supplier. And, as part of our strategy and coming up with payment plans and figuring out how to hold on to cash, we found that some suppliers were able to offer us a discount if we paid them sooner. Typically, on the procurement side, you're looking for the best deal, and unless you run a full-on RFP and figure out what the market is, right? You don't know if you're getting the most competitive pricing or if you're leaving money on the table. One indicator that I'm getting that will take me further with the team is if there is a supplier who we've been doing business with that we haven't revisited pricing and they're able to give us a 20 to 25% discount on that invoice or the balance, right? That's a key indicator that there may be a discount beyond just the AR that we could bring into on the procurement side from a piece price standpoint or from a cost standpoint. It may not be 20 to 25%, but it could be 15 to 20%. But while we get out of this, I think our plan and the recommendation that I would have for everybody on the procurement side is connect with your AP side and work very closely with them to see which suppliers are doing that. So you can have a follow through as you continue to come out of this, and then have a go forward plan into end of 2020, 21 is how do you circle back with those suppliers and maybe not beat them up, but gain an understanding, set an agenda and gain an understanding on how they were able to afford to give you that discount level and maybe back into a pricing model or a pricing discount that may not have been the 20-25%, but it could be the 15 to 20%, right? That will help your organization in terms of managing costs. That's one way of backing into this in terms of negotiations with suppliers. You also want to understand too is do you necessarily want to negotiate with suppliers where today, when you know as an organization you're not going to be buying that product, so look at your sourcing pipeline and move maybe some of the categories out, which towards the end of the year, if you know you're not buying against most of those categories, right? You definitely don't want to negotiate with suppliers on PPE right now. So it's figuring out the right time in the moment and how much ROI you're going to get on from that, and do you want to put your resources to that right now, or focus on maybe getting some clues like the discounts, to then create a pipeline of opportunities coming out of this.
That's great, Nyla. Thank you. Anybody else who has a couple comments on this topic?
I wanted to talk about something really quickly. So one thing we did was, for example, some of the folks on the real estate side of the house, the procurement. So when our suppliers and us, everyone right now is really worried about cash. Again, this is something that requires trust and building those relationships. Some of the conversations we've had is, okay, so let's say we want to split up instead of paying whatever, $50,000 a month for rent at this facility or $100,000 a month. We'd like to mitigate dishing out cash, and but we don't want to break you guys or have us cost you anything. So we've actually been fairly successful at getting real numbers from some of our suppliers where we say, okay, can you share with us approximately how much the mortgage costs are and insurance and all that for these facilities? And how about if we agree to pay a 10% premium on top of that, and that's what we'll pay you for this round. And we were really pleasantly surprised to find out that some of our suppliers are really open and said, hey, we're charging you $50,000 a month for rent, but what's left on the mortgage might be $35,000. Okay, increase it by 10%, pay us $40,000 a month until the end of the year instead of the $50,000. And bam, now you've got a 20% cost reduction, until the end of the year. And it was due to the suppliers being flexible and us also being flexible and saying, what's the best way we can work it. So we had a lot of success with that. I was very surprised at how open and transparent some of our suppliers were. So it was a great experience.
That's great. And it's amazing what happens just when you ask sometimes, right? Goes a long way. All right, well, let's wrap up with one last question for all the panelists. As we're, in this environment and sort of approaching what appears to be a new norm, how do you see all of your relationships being impacted, and sort of thinking long-term and into the future? Your teams, your leadership, your suppliers, your clients, how will those relationships maybe change? Will some of this, empathetic solutions, do you think that they'll be maintained going forward? Or do you think it'll, at some point we'll revert back to the normal, this is how we do it? Who'd like to maybe go first?
Go first.
Nyla?
Yeah.
Sonia, great.
So I think in my experience, or what we're seeing here is, I think the relationships are getting more strengthened. So I'm always looking for a silver lining in everything, right? And one of the benefits that we're seeing, fortunate or unfortunate of this pandemic, is that I've been, as a team, is trying to lead my team to try to go global right? And work with all the other regions, whether it's Canada, whether it's EMEA, ANZPAC, what have you. And I will tell you, over the last 8 weeks, I have not talked so often with those teams from a procurement and AP standpoint. And I don't think that's going to go away. I mean, I think we're now trying to, build our brand and show them structure, right? And show them like the sourcing process. There is a sourcing process that we have that we've used over the last 5 years that the other entities may not have seen. And maybe we're not as familiar with what they're doing as well. So I think it's starting to strengthen our relationships at a global level, internally too, because we are now in this environment of being isolated and remote from one another, having, again, PowerPoint presentations and the structure and showing this is the plan with timelines and everything. One, helps create discipline within the team, but it shows them too that they're winning as they make progress in the plan. And then when they present that to their leadership or my leadership as well and through, having that structure only solidifies what procurement can do for them. So I'm feeling fairly optimistic that this is not going to fall to the wayside and that this is the new norm and that we can, we always had excuses and reasons why we couldn't do it. And now we're just within 8 weeks or 10 weeks have eliminated those reasons and we're heading forward very quickly.
That's great. That's great. Sonia, you were going to chime in, I think, on this topic.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I think 2 keywords we have to remember during these times when it comes to relationship is empathy and trust. Empathy for your colleagues, your suppliers, your family, your friends, your relatives, everybody around you. You don't know, and it is really, really true. It becomes really important right now. You don't know what somebody is going through. You don't know how their well-being is, how they are dealing with it mentally, physically, how their family members are, how their colleagues are, how their employees are. Those are things you don't know, and I would caution anybody to presume everything's okay in somebody's life because you never know, right? And people may put up a very strong face. Your suppliers may come across as really strong and stable, but you don't want to wait till they file for bankruptcy and your system's shut down, right? So understand, empathize, and trust. I think trust is extremely, extremely important. You're not in an offices together. We don't see our teams. We don't interact. We don't have that physical interaction anymore where you can shake a hand or look somebody in the eye. You're in a video where people obviously have other distractions and stuff. So trust in your colleagues to get the job done. Trust in your suppliers to do what they've been asked to do, and trust in your leadership. I think that's really, really important. If as leaders, we can sustain the trust with our teams and grow that trust, we should think of this as an opportunity to actually build that trust to the next level, to be able to give that accommodation and that transparency to our teams and colleagues, to our stakeholders, of having that trust and build that trust. Don't think of this as an excuse to go back on your commitments. If you have a real difficulty in meeting those commitments, then be honest. I think this, in one way, this is a global pandemic that we're dealing with. People in every corner of the world understand what you may be going through, which is unprecedented in itself. So we are a global organization. We're a transatlantic bank. So we have people across the world. And it's really humbling to see people going through this situation, going through this pandemic and how they're dealing with it. So I think empathy and trust would be my lasting, words on those relationships, to make sure you take each and every one, and same amongst your family. Right? You have a work life and you have a home life, you have a personal life. Don't ignore that. It's just as important that you have strong relationship with your suppliers and your colleagues and your teams and your leadership as much as it is for your family. They are your rock that will support you. So, I think it's important to not take them for granted while you're going through this. And most of all yourself, right? Just it's your well-being is the probably most important part.
Yeah, that's why they tell you to put on your air mask first when you're on a plane, right? In an emergency, you got to take care of yourself first. So, and I think your comments piggyback a little bit on Nyla's as well, that, you know, hopefully these, you know, the compassion and the empathy will be enduring, and the relationships will strengthen as a result of what we're going through, and not sort of, you know, revert back, if you will. Rachel, did you have any closing comments?
I just have one. The new norm has changed every day for us over the past several months. We think we know what we're heading into, and then it changes. And just this last week, one of the things that I've noticed a little bit, I'll use Nyla's silver lining word, is a change in behavior by people asking how you're doing, and it's not a casual question. They're saying, "How are you today?" and meaning it. And I think that that has driven a positive outcome almost unexpectedly, and truly listening. So yes, empathy, trust, and I will add one word, which is listening. Listening in a different way, asking a questions with a genuine intent and understanding and hearing those people has been the biggest change in our environment, and it's positive. Listening to people and hearing them in any way, asking them how their kids did, and hearing about the play that they were in virtually, and getting a clip of their dance video is a new part of doing something that we didn't look at before. Adjusting to people who are now a little bit afraid to go outside was the second part of that. Genuine fear and the unknown and unplanned events aren't something that procurement is used to. We write everything down in a contract and we plan for those unknowns, and this is new. And so hearing from people what they're experiencing directly is important. I think that if I could leave you with one word from me, it is listen. Listen, give a few minutes that you stop what is important in your agenda and just listen to what they want to share.
I think that's great advice, Rachel. Irini, anything from you?
Sorry about that. So I'd say there are three main areas of focus through this pandemic that I think, in order to be a good leader, one should focus on. So I think, obviously, number one, we've talked about this over and over again, communication, keeping those lines of communication open. Number two, transparency. And that goes with whether it's your leadership team or your individual employees and your staff, or with your suppliers. And the third one, empathy and kindness. I think those are key as well. One thing I've started to implement, and it started with our leadership team as well, is instead of having those weekly staff meetings with each individual and with the team, I'm setting up every other week meetings with people who report into me and with critical suppliers. And we just make it a quick half-an-hour meeting, and I tell them, this meeting isn't going to be about business per se. Let's use this meeting to just connect and talk about, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? Is there anything you want to talk about? And I've heard so much about these birthday parties that people are having now, where everyone, you know, wraps up their car with balloons and whatnot and drops by different people's houses. People have told me have expressed to me the joy of cooking and baking, to the point that I have now baked in the last week 8 banana bread loaves myself. And it's something that I never would have thought of doing before, but I use it as an opportunity to reach out to friends and say, hey, I know you're gonna have a mask and you don't want to let me in the house, and that's okay, but can I please see your new dog, just like through the window? And oh, by the way, here's a banana loaf. So I've been trying to do that, not just with personal friends, but also with people that I work with, because again, I think they like to see that in their leaders and see that we are human beings too. Additionally, I think that we will start seeing a lot more Microsoft meetings, Zoom calls, to keep and increase that employee engagement. And I have started to ask people, as my leadership has asked me, is they say, can you please turn on the video option if you don't mind, so that we can actually see each other and connect more. Another thing is, I think the new norm will be a lot less travel to visit supplier sites because of the cost and the risk of COVID-19 contagion spread. So we'll need to find new ways of working remotely with our suppliers, which may include more quarterly, biannual business reviews online. I think this is also a great time for all of us on this panel, and for employees and staff and leadership overall, for those exceptional employees, those people who really want to ramp it up to the next level, to really shine and shimmer, like one of the mottos is of this whole GWPP group. as they take on more leadership roles and learning how to navigate through those contracts, through those supplier relationships, through the employee relationships, through this global pandemic. And then lastly, I think this is something good that's coming out of it. I think there's going to be a lot less micromanaging of employees, checking, are they at their desk? What time do they come in? You've got some managers, how long do they take for a lunch break? I think now, if people have that inclination, I think it's going to be a lot more now about deliverables and is this person delivering and delivering what they're committed to delivering.
Yeah, agreed. And that, that concept of not being micromanaged and trusting your employees, I do think is hopefully going to be enhanced here. So lots of great themes that, I definitely noticed some commonalities across all of our panelists today in terms of better communication, more empathy, getting creative with ideas, using data to back it up. So very, very appreciative. I think we've wrapped up with our questions for today. So I want to thank all of the panelists for your time and your thoughtful answers. We really, really appreciate it. Also want to thank Amanda and GWPP for giving all of us this opportunity to spend a little time together today and for producing events like this. So Amanda, did you have any closing comments that you'd like to comment on?
Sure. Here, let me start my video again. I didn't want to distract, but I just want to thank each and every one of you. The conversation today has been very robust, and I know I commented a couple of times that your ladies are right spot on. You're getting your shimmer on each and every day. So I truly appreciate each and every one of you and for those who joined today. So thank you so much to Insight Sourcing Group again for your sponsorship and your leadership today. So with that said, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.